Welcome to the Carolina World Trade Association's presentation of NC Ports, Economic Impact and Virtual Tour. One state, two ports, categorically #1. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and your continued participation is implied consent to being so recorded. Also note that as you join this discussion, your microphones are automatically muted. If you have questions during this discussion, please use the chat box in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I will look to see those questions and find the appropriate time to raise them. The presentation will last no longer than 50 minutes, after which time we will remain convened for questions, comments, and general networking for another half hour. I want to emphasize that we invite you to stay online immediately following this webinar so we can create some networking time where you will have a chance to introduce yourselves and meet others on this call. The Carolina World Trade Association promotes the growth of trade between North Carolina and the world by providing education and networking opportunities for our global ecosystem. As a business-driven nonprofit organization, CWTA's mission is to promote, foster, and encourage international commerce success and expand economic growth in the Carolinas region. We do this by, #1, advocating the interests of businesses engaged in international trade on the local, regional, state, and federal levels. #2, we educate businesses and their employees to the resources, issues, policies, and practices within international trade. 3rd, we promote regional assets and opportunities for expanding inbound and outbound international commerce. And 4th, we celebrate the successes of international trade in the region. We'd like to remind you we're always seeking new members, and we invite you to join at our website, CWTA.org. CWTA depends on membership revenue to bring you programs like this, for us to meet and provide networking opportunities to all members. We'd like to thank our CWTA sponsors that make this possible. They include the North Carolina Ports Authority, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Wood Forest National Bank, Greer and Walker, Garfinkel Immigration Law Firm, Allen Gordon Immigration Law, Magellan Aviation Group, Wilbert Plastic Services, Transocean Equipment Management, and the Allegro Foundation. And thank you for participating today. I'd like to encourage all of you to register for the National Association of District Export Councils annual conference on Wednesday and Thursday of next week. You should have received information on it from us already, and you'll receive more in the days to come. CWTA will be holding another virtual event in June, and looking forward to our first in-person luncheon in mid-July. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First is Brian Clark, the Executive Director of the North Carolina State's Ports Authority. He was appointed Executive Director in June 2020 and assumed that position in January 2021. Under Clark's leadership, North Carolina ports completed critical infrastructure improvements, including container berth renovations, turning basin expansion, air draft improvements, and the addition of 3 new neo-Panamax cranes. Additionally, Clark is leading the container terminal master plan aimed at increasing the capacity of the Port of Wilmington. In May 2020, NC Ports welcomed its largest container vessel to ever call on the Port of Wilmington. I'm going to hold here for a minute and let some people in. And then I'm going to add the fact that we also have Hans Bean, the Chief Commercial Officer. Hans was appointed Chief Commercial Officer in 2019. He's been a member of NC Ports since 2016, most recently serving as Senior Vice President of Business Development. Bean has played an integral role in the organization's record-breaking success applying his extensive commercial experience to attract new business and grow existing business at NC Ports. As a vital member of the business development team, Bean helped support the Port Authority's record fiscal year in 2018, the addition of several new container service lines, and the relaunch of an enhanced intermodal rail service. Unfortunately, Aaron Brott will not be joining us today, but Aaron wanted to be part of this presentation. Aaron is the Senior Director, Key Clients and Trade Development, and has 25 years of diversified management experience. I'm sorry he can't join us, but we're going to learn more about him at a future time. I'm going to turn this over at this point to Brian Clark.
Right.
I'm going to, hold on, I've got to mute some people here. And I will unmute Brian, and Brian, you're on.
Excellent. Good morning, John, and thank you for inviting us to present today, and thank you to everybody for attending today. We're excited to give an update on North Carolina ports, and we have a presentation to share. Certainly, a PowerPoint doesn't take the place of an insight visit, so we extend that invitation for a future meeting. I would love to host a group at the ports to see firsthand everything that's going on here. I'll give you a second to get the presentation up. I see it as well.
All right.
I think we're a go. Thank you, Landry.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again, John, for inviting us to join today. We're excited to give a presentation about North Carolina ports. To kind of level set the presentation, we do want to share a lot of the investments that we've made over the last several years. We want to talk about the importance of those investments. We will share a little bit later some of the commercial successes and some of our commercial targets. Ultimately, you know, our goal in operating the ports is to grow the business and ultimately support the state and the shippers and receivers that do business through the state. But to talk a little bit about our facilities, we do operate 2 deepwater ports, the port in Wilmington, the port in Moorhead City. We also operate an inland port in Charlotte. We have a daily intermodal train service that runs between Wilmington and Charlotte. And we'll share a few details on those, all 3 of those facilities. But just to take a look at some overall facts, we handle about 5,000 container gate moves a week through our container facility in Wilmington. Size, certainly not one of the largest, but a fair bit of business that we've seen growing over the last number of years. We handle a little over 300,000 TEUs on an annual basis. Conversely, we handle a significant amount of general cargo through both port facilities. We're actually one of the largest in the South Atlantic with our bulk and breakbulk cargo. So we're excited. We're a fairly balanced business in that regard between container and general cargo. And we really point at that as being a driver of our success over the last year, particularly with the unknown global economic conditions with the effect of COVID. We handle about 1,000 vessel calls a year between both ports. And as I mentioned, we have the rail service between here and Charlotte. It's operated by CSX. It's branded as the Queen City Express. So it's actually a service that we as the ports contract with our customers for. And we're extremely proud to show that this service between here and Charlotte's operating almost at 100% on-time reliability, which is really an unknown these days in the industry. We are operated as a business. We report up through the Department of Transportation in the state, where we are overseen by a board of directors. And we get great support from the General Assembly and from the state as a whole. But again, we operate as a business. We have our own P&L statement. We have our own balance sheet. We are responsible for our day-to-day operations through the commercial contracts that we have with our customers. Our FY20 figures are at the bottom there of this slide. We're nearing the end of actually FY21, so these will be updated. But FY20 was actually a record year for us in terms of revenue, in terms of profit, and in terms of cash generation that we're able to reinvest in the business. We do receive on an annual basis capital appropriations through the state, and those appropriations are geared towards just that, improving the infrastructure of both port facilities. So a lot of these later slides that we share are those projects that we deemed critical and that we were able to put in place and complete based on these capital appropriations that we're receiving from the state. Landry, if you can flip to the next slide, please. The next couple of slides are overviews of the 3 locations. We want to talk about them in a little bit more detail. The Port of Wilmington is a full service operation, just under 300 acres. We have land to grow, both waterfront as well as near port acreage, about 150 total acres between the 2. We do operate all types of cargo here, with container operations being about 100 acres of that 284 total. And then we handle ro-ro, bulk, and break bulk, both directly and through tenants on our port facility. A lot of investment that's been made has been over the last several years to improve the capabilities of the Port of Wilmington to be able to handle the ever-growing size of the container ships that are calling in on the East Coast. And again, we'll share some of those specific projects a little bit later. In both ports, we are what is known as an operating port. So the operation of our heavy equipment, our cranes, our gate operations are actually conducted by ports employees. We work hand in hand with stevedores that perform work, and also the stevedores who directly employ the International Longshoremen's Association. They are a great partner of ours between the stevedores and the ILA, and really have allowed us to grow the business and perform at an extremely high level, which we're extremely proud of. Landry, if you can flip to the next slide. A little bit more detail on the Port of Morehead City. About 128 acres with about another 150 acres of developable near port property. We are, one of the key characteristics of Moorhead City is its short distance from the open sea. It's about 4 miles, and also a naturally deep channel authorized at 45 feet. Between both ports, we have 9 total berths. So we are fully capable of handling a number of vessels alongside at the same time. And in both ports, we have about 1 million square foot of covered space. Again, a combination of operated as well as leased facilities. The difference between the 2, based on rail service, Wilmington's served by CSX and Moorhead City's served by Norfolk Southern. On the next slide, we have a quick overview of the Charlotte Inland Port. As I said, we operate a daily intermodal service between Wilmington and Charlotte. The containers are handled actually at the CSX ramp and then drayed about 1 mile over to our facility for staging. The benefit of that is there's no on port or on ramp dwell, which is extremely important these days for efficiency of moving containers in and out of these intermodal ramps. We're extremely proud of this service, as I said, near perfect on-time performance. We started it back in 2017 after a long absence of having intermodal service. About a year ago, we actually made a significant upgrade to that service to allow for this overnight 24-hour movement between Wilmington and Charlotte. And we've just seen phenomenal growth in these volumes over the last number of years. So we look forward to the future. We'll talk a little bit later about that, but our expectation is that the Rocky Mount facility, which is a new CSX intermodal facility in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, will come online at the end of this year. We view this as another opportunity to develop an inland port to support North Carolina port's volume. Also will give us greater access to the CSX intermodal network, which we know many of our customers are seeking for us to have that capability for. On the next slide, I mean, ultimately our goal as an entity of the state is to support the economy in North Carolina. These figures that you see on the screen are based on our 2018 economic contribution study. There have been several iterations of that study prior to 2018, and we've seen constant growth in each of these key metrics. The plan is within the next year, we will move forward with a new study. The expectation is that each of these will continue to increase. But ultimately, we want to generate jobs across the state by the cargo moving through our ports. We want to generate the economic output. $15.5 billion on an annual basis is a significant figure right now, but we certainly expect, based on the investments, based on the growth of volumes, and based on our improved capability of handling cargo moving in and out of the state, these numbers will rise. Today, we're handling, interestingly enough, only about 15% of the cargo that moves in and out of the state of North Carolina moves through North Carolina ports. So as we improve our capabilities, as we improve the global connection, we expect that figure to rise, ultimately reducing the cost for those consumers, for those producers to move cargo through our ports. So as I said, we're sharing our FY20 performance highlights. It was a record year despite the onset of COVID in the last quarter of that fiscal year. We're expecting similar type growth year over year, despite some of these challenges, but we still have 2 months left of that year. So on our FY20 basis, we actually saw positive growth on container volume. That actually one of the only East Coast ports that was able to share that type of positive growth. Overall, we've seen the most dramatic increase in our refrigerated cargo segment. A lot of our investment has been made to support that particular vertical, and a lot of our future investment will be made to support the expected continued growth there. As I said, we're balanced. Our general cargo volumes were up significantly across both ports. You can see our FY20 36% increase year over year, mainly driven by grain volumes. And again, a lot of our investment in the future will be based on how we support this general cargo flow, which we know will continue to be a key part of our business. Charlotte Inland Port, as I mentioned, we've seen just dramatic growth over the last several years. We're excited about the service levels that we're able to provide, and we look forward to that future reach in the Rocky Mount and beyond into the CSX network. And then Moorhead City has been a tremendous story over the last number of years. We've essentially doubled the volume between FY14 and 19. It was a little utilized facility, fairly inefficient. We've made some investments there. We brought on a new gantry crane in the last year, and we expect to look forward to future investments to help increase the capacity and hopefully drive additional volumes moving through that port. So as I started out, really one of our major drivers is how we compete in an ever-growing containerized industry. We see and we hear the investments that are being made up and down the East Coast, really with the focus of how each of those ports would support the growth of these vessels. The picture of the vessel in front of us here is the largest ship that's calling in the Port of Wilmington right now. It's a little over 14,000 TEUs. And that figure, that size vessel has grown just within the last number of years significantly. In 2016, we had our first challenge placed in front of us by our carrier customers, and that was to be able to handle a 9,500 TEU ship that was expected to be cascaded into a previous service that we handled. In order to do that, we had to dredge the first phase of the turning basin, and we also had to make sure that we had the cranes capable of supporting those ships. So you can see in 3 short years, these ships have grown from these 9,500, what at that time was the workhorse on the East Coast, to these 14,000 TEU class vessels. And I'm sure everybody's hearing about the 16,000 TEU class vessel that's just arrived into Halifax, I think, yesterday, and will call in many ports on the East Coast this week. So a lot of our focus, as I said, has been geared towards the container side of the house to make sure that we continue to be relevant. Not every service is being upgraded, but we realize a significant portion of our volume was geared towards a trans-Pacific trade where these vessels are the new normal, if you will.
And Brian, if I could add a little bit there, and John, actually, I recall, had the opportunity to share with CWTA back in 2017. At that point, we knew we needed to get ready for these larger vessels. The projections really showed that maybe 12,000 TEUs would be the next workhorse, and the upsizing has taken place so rapidly. The cascading of the global fleet from other major trades like Asia to Europe has now shown that the East Coast is going to be working in that 12 to 15 or 16,000 range. And we've just seen a lot of order book activity, about over 70 vessels for the Trans-Pacific that will be ready over the next 2 to 3 years. And they are right in that 13 to 15,000 TEU range. So these investments were timely. And the reality is they were really done with the signals from the carrier headquarters, many of them in Asia and in Europe. And we're well positioned now to be able to cater to the supply chains running on these larger Trans-Pacific services.
And just to show the growth of, Landry, if you go back to the last slide real quick, just some real-time updates. You can see in this picture at the bow of the vessel, the new neo-Panamax cranes. We'll talk a little bit later about those. But right in front of the aft house, you can see the two low-profile Panamax cranes. These previous cranes that we used to work our vessels with. They actually left the port on Sunday. They're being removed from our facility based on their inability to work some of these larger ships. They were purchased by another port and will be put back into useful life in the near future. So you can just talk about some of the improvements we've made, but also addressing some of the equipment we've had in place to make sure we have the right assets to support the trade. On the next slide, it's kind of an overview of our capital improvement plan. It's certainly much more detailed than this. It spans warehouse, it spans roadways, it spans major projects in both ports. But these were the key projects that we had to implement in order to support these large ships and meet the timeline that our customers were sharing with us. Most importantly, we had to redevelop the berths. We had to bring in the new cranes. We had to make sure that the berths were capable of supporting the weight of these cranes as well as the size of the vessels. We had to expand the turning basin twice, actually through 2 phases. And then ultimately, longer term is developing the channel and making sure that we have sufficient water depth in the Cape Fear River to support these ever growing but deeper or more utilized vessels. So the next several slides, we're going to share a few of the details. But ultimately, the overall investment project started with our container yard expansion master plan. And Landry, if you can flip to slide 10, please. We worked several years ago with an engineering firm to take a look at our current capabilities, our future demand, our future potential volumes, and really map out a multi-year investment strategy in the port facility. We had the berths and we had the berth capacity. Certainly we needed to bring in the new ship-to-shore cranes, which we did. We identified our need for developing a refrigerated container facility. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But ultimately, one of our challenges was the gate capacity that we had in our existing interchange gate. So that's a major project that's underway right now to right-size the gate facility, to bring in new technology with a terminal operating system and a gate operating system. We're excited to see this project coming out of the ground. It's actually part of a later slide. We'll show a rendering of it. We expect this project, the physical civil project, to be completed by August of this year. We have a 2-stage terminal operating system rollout. We've already completed it for the general cargo facility. We have go live under phase 1 for containers at the end of June. And then ultimately, along with the new gate complex, we'll roll out a new gate operating system using the latest technology, which is very common in a lot of ports. It hadn't been utilized in Wilmington in the past, but we expect to see much more efficient exchange of data and processing of drivers in and out of the port facility to complement what we have today is extremely low turn times on the port facility itself. We go to the next slide. We mentioned the crane and berth investments. Over the last several years, we had to rebuild 2 of the container berths. We had to upsize those and increase the capacity to support these neo-Panamax cranes, increase the bollard strength as well as the fendering system to support these neo-Panamax vessels alongside. And this is a picture of both berth 8 and berth 7, which combined was about a $50 million investment prior to us bringing on the 3 neo-Panamax cranes, which is an additional $30 million investment. Having the capability alongside the berth was important. What was extremely more important is making sure that the vessels could arrive safely, be turned in the river, and dock. On slide number 12, we had a key project that we worked alongside with Duke Energy Progress to address an air draft restriction in the river. South of the port, we have power lines across the river. You can see them in the picture here. The previous air draft that was allowed under these wires was 171 feet. And you can see at the bottom of the slide a few comparative ports between Charleston and Savannah at 186 feet and the Port of New York and New Jersey at 215 feet. So we really used New York, New Jersey as the standard as to when we worked with Duke to identify a solution. They looked at burying wires, they looked at replacing towers, they looked at a number of solutions, but ultimately came upon an engineering solution that modified the existing towers, replaced the conduits with a newer technology that sagged less. They were able to do it in about a 6-month period of time, and ultimately at a cost of about $20 million, so significantly below the other options that were out there. What that allows for now is an air draft of 212 feet under these wires, a significant improvement from previous. And you can see really close to the target mark of 215 up in New York, New Jersey. Almost every vessel that calls the East Coast, or I should say every vessel that calls the East Coast, calls either the Port of New York or the Port of Savannah, and some of them both. So that's really why those two ports are critical targets from a benchmarking standpoint for us. The turning basin was the other critical project that we had to complete. As I said, it was a 2-phase project. The first project allowed us to turn these 1,150-foot long vessels that were calling previously, the 9,500, 10,000 TEU class. But as our customers started talking about these 14 and 15,000 TEU vessels, we knew we needed a little bit more of a safety margin with the turning basin. So in March of 2020, we completed this project. It involved driving a sheet pile wall on the top of this picture, which is the east side of the river, to reinforce the tank farms and support that bank. It gives us an overall distance of 1,524 feet. So safely at this point in time, we're capable of turning a vessel up to 1,300 feet. And as I mentioned before, the 16,000 TEU vessel that's moving down the East Coast today has a length overall of 1,300 feet. So really smart investments at the right time to make sure that we can remain competitive in an extremely competitive industry. As we look at certain verticals of cargo, on the next slide is phase 1 of our new refrigerated container yard. As I mentioned, this is one of our high growth areas, not just on the export, which is extremely important to the state, but also on the growing import market. And that's also important to make sure that our customers have the equipment in place to support this high demand on the export. We went from a minimal reefer capacity of about 200 plugs, a little over 200 plugs, spread throughout the port, to this new racking system that allows us to plug in a total of 540 reefers, provides for backup emergency power in case we lose power for any means, but really allowed us to grow our capabilities and support an ever-growing amount of volume. March and April of this year were actually new record years with the total number of reefers handled across the dock. And this growth has been so strong, we're actually in the design phase process of phase 2 for the next section of the reefer yard. The plan is by the end of this year, we're hopefully out the bid and under contract, and early next year have phase 2 of this project completed.
Yeah, and Brian, if I would add on this one, you mentioned the record months, March and April. It's really a great indication. This was built based on market demand, based on signals with our customers. And what's fantastic is we're fairly diversified from an import-export basis, but also on a trade corridor basis. And this is really being put to work. It's a preferred cargo segment. I mean, obviously, our first mission is to take care of the businesses shipping out and into the state, but also from a carrier standpoint, this is a preferred segment for the ocean carrier. So it makes the gateway much more attractive from that perspective. And it's very exciting to see our carriers going to Europe with ICL, the carriers in the Americas with Crowley and Sealand, and the Trans-Pacific carriers are all using this, and we continue to see the scale grow. So very exciting. I know Brian likes the vertical nature of densifying in the master plan. That's where we need to go. But this also adds to the fluidity of folks doing cold business here at the port. There's a cold storage literally about 100 meters from this refrigerated container yard, and how this optimizes the operation for the truckers, the mechanics, all the stakeholders is really, we've seen this really a great response from the market, and I'm excited to see phase 2 come online in the near future.
Thanks, Hans. And the last slide I wanted to share, slide 15, talks a little bit about, oh, I'm sorry, slide 15 is the new gate, a very important project. As I mentioned before, civil construction is underway. It essentially doubles our capacity from our current gate complex. Part of this project is a new operations building and a total of 13 inbound and outbound lanes. The technology is the most exciting part of this. We will be working with the trucking industry to deploy RFID tags that identify the individual trucks, marry those trucks to the trucking companies that are approved to do business through the port, and really just expedites the process from a driver clearing security, weigh in motion scales, optical character recognition cameras to capture the data that feeds into the gate system and ultimately processes the drivers in and out of the port facility. So as I said, this civil project is scheduled to be completed in August, and in line with the new GOS or gate operating system and new terminal operating system. We'll roll that out towards the latter part of this year. And now on to the final slide that I'm going to present. We talk about all the investments that have been made to support the business today. Certainly looking towards the future, there's more to be made. What we've seen up and down the East Coast is these ports are continuing to invest and are investing in deepening their access channels to and from their ports. If you look at this slide here, a number of these projects are either completed or have been completed, but you can see in every one of them, there's an active project to deepen upwards of 50 and 55 feet in some of these ports. Today, the Cape Fear River has a authorized depth of 42 feet. That was deepened several years ago from a previous depth of 38. But as these vessels get larger, they can handle more cargo, and certainly the carriers want to optimize and benefit from their economies of scale. So they need to load them deeper. So as we're looking forward, we've completed what is known as a 203 study, which is a non-federal study of a federal navigational feature. We submitted that study to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. That study was approved and has been conditionally authorized through the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. There are several conditions that need to be met. And then certainly there's the appropriations that are required on both the non-federal and the federal side that need to be sorted out. So we're excited about this project. It's a multi-year effort to get to the point of a final approved and funded project, and then ultimately a multi-year project to actually construct. Certainly we're mindful of concerns, and a significant part of this deepening project is mitigation, addressing any potential impacts that might be caused by the deepening. Certainly we want to grow our capabilities, but we also want to make sure that we're protecting our local community and the environment around us. So with that, just a highlight of some of the projects that are underway. And I'm going to pass it off to Hans to talk a little bit more detail about our commercial operations.
Great, thanks, Brian. And ultimately, this is a tremendous amount of expansion and upgrade and investment, and as Brian mentioned, great support from the state. Ultimately, how this translates to how we serve the market, that's what's most important in many respects. How we enable the businesses in North Carolina and the region to better serve themselves and their partners. And so I'm going to touch on some of that. And as Brian mentioned, some of our mantra here is, we're not the biggest gateway on the East Coast, but in many respects, we say we need to be the best. And that's across both the general cargo and the container side. And really a lot of that gets down to how we compete, how we measure performance. So if we can go to the next slide, Landry. From a competitive basis, we needed to be able to deliver certain capabilities that Brian touched on a lot of them in terms of the scale and the readiness to make sure we could cater to all trade corridors, whether it's size of vessel, whether it's being able to make sure that we've got the capability from a refrigerated standpoint and those other capabilities. But really where we see ourselves shining and where we've seen some recent recognition by, by really major industry voices is speed. I mean, that is our brand. And when you look at this from a gate productivity, when we talk about truckers, value proposition to the trucking community, and eventually the cargo community attached to that. For ships, the vessel productivity, that is best in class. Both of those are really best in class in the United States. Journal of Commerce had recognized us accordingly. So I think that's a mark and a recognition we intend to maintain. We will be growing. We need scale, but we cannot compromise on the metrics. So this is really our bread and butter about how do we deliver the value. And I tell you, this has really gotten a lot of attention as the rebound from COVID had taken place and production ramped back up in Asia and Europe and other markets and in Latin America. We've seen and heard the stories of tremendous supply chain pain and congestion on the West Coast, north of us, up in the Northeast, also south of us, where gateways, they were built, they handle scale, but how does the performance, how is it maintained? And this, we've really seen our customers and even new customers coming to take a look at how they can deploy and use Wilmington in their overall supply chain networks. This is becoming more and more critical. And I think some of the measures in the industry are changing from, well, we've done more scale to, well, how have you handled that scale? And I think we're glad to see that performance dialogue change. Next slide. Ultimately, we always try to bring it back to the market, back to the customer, and back to our economic growth, partners here. And it really comes down to a few simple things. You see some performance indicators and some metrics on the left there, and we talk about always translating so that the user and the stakeholders can really connect that to how it affects their business. And it comes down to being scalable, being ready to expand the cold chain on many fronts. Brian mentioned we have had a very strong export cold chain business with a lot of our agriculture and protein, but we're seeing that start to cross over into fresh imports, where we see growth there is projected by the USDA to go over 50% between now and 2030. So it's vital that we can serve the grocery sector here in the North Carolina, across the state, especially in the western part of the state. Also, in terms of the speed and productivity, as I mentioned, we will not compromise there. Scalable wise, we look like we're ready to play for the next several years, but we need to watch closely where the vessel deployments and the networks are going, so we make sure that we're ready for the scale on the East Coast. That harbor enhancement project is vital to that, so that not only can ships call here, they can load fully on imports and exports, so they can maximize their port call here in Wilmington. Fluidity.
Hans, we
Yes,
have
sir.
a question. I don't know if you know, Wayne Cooper is the honorary consul from Mexico. And he asked the question, does any trade from Mexico come through Wilmington?
It does, but I will say we had some direct connectivity several years ago. We're in some dialogues right now to try to reinstate that. We've seen a lot of that fresh commerce with Mexico, especially on the produce side, go into cross-border trucking. And so we had some services that were catering to that, several years ago. The cross-border truck avenue became the preferred avenue on that supply chain. But now between the refrigerated segments and especially the automotive segments, we're seeing those dialogues pick back up. So we're looking and pushing to get that direct connectivity reinstated with some of the Mexico trade flows and the partners that serve them. So great question.
He could put in a good word for you if you ever want to call Wayne. He can help you with that.
And that's what this is all about. Honestly, it's a community. We needed to do a lot of things here at the port to get this toolkit ready. It is delivering performance, but it's really through working with partners that we increase the connectivity and the agreements and the deals get made to be able to have people optimize and use this gateway. So, and that really segues to one of the last things when translating on this side. It's really about connectivity and really the rapid connectivity to the inland points where a lot of this business goes. We highlight this because this is really about our next phase of development. It is so vital. A lot of what North Carolina Ports has done and done very well has been focused a great deal on certain verticals, very agriculture oriented, which we will maintain. It's our biggest sector in the state. But there are many, many other verticals that we want to make sure we are orienting ourselves to serve to have the value proposition that caters to each of the regions in the state And as you see there across those major regions, the density of the particular industry sets and verticals that are arranged there. And what we see with our partners, they very much look at the layout of a state like this, a lot of the economic partnerships and the associations such as yourselves. It is a whole state conversation. And this is where we need to go on our next phase, is really working with our partners to say, how are we catering to these verticals in this region? And really with multinationals, we often see their supply chains are a combination of import and export. We're seeing a lot more food processing in the East. We're seeing more industrial, automotive, even electric vehicle and battery sets on the western side towards Charlotte. So really, I'm excited about this because it's about, now that we've demonstrated the toolkit, it's about converting, developing, and winning more supply chains to put these gateway performance capabilities to work. That's really, again, as Brian said, our mission. It's really going to be measured on economic impact and how we're supporting growth and performance here. And, the pain that is in supply chains right now, the additional cost and delay, we have no congestion here. Vessels can pretty much berth any day of the week. And that is the beginning of that food chain, but it's really about being able to get in and out and get into these industry clusters, if you will, and working with our economic development partners. So I'm very excited about this. The last year, we've gotten a lot closer to our partners across the state, and that will continue. Next slide.
We've got another question, Hans.
Yes, sir.
Matt Hewlett asks, what is the CBP staffing and involvement in seizures and detainments at these ports? What's the volume of seizures per year at each port?
It is a small percentage. I don't know if Brian will want to comment on that. What I will say is, we never compromise on safety and security. We have to lead with that. We have great partners with Customs and Border Protection and USDA. So it is a small percentage, and we work closely. Obviously, they cannot compromise on the mission, but we do what we can to make sure that fluidity and flow continue to move. I don't know, Brian, if you want to weigh in.
Only for the fact to echo your comment about our partnership with CBP. Obviously they're great supporters. They're on the port facilities. The seizures, I think it's such a minimal number. It's really not too visible either. So I can't comment on the actual percentage, but I do want to just highlight the great working relationship we do have with our partners there.
Thanks, Brian. An example today, we have some major customers, new users that will be ramping up some programs in the port. They're going to meet with all those partners today. And honestly, especially in certain corridors, we find that is vital. And that's one of the first questions that comes. How's the relationship with Customs and Border and USDA? And so we intend to keep that at the forefront. They're great partners here. So next slide, when we talk about carrier services and our reach into the market, really this global connectivity, that's a goal and a requirement for us over the next many years. Again, we've got momentum, but we need to connect to all these markets. You can see our current set in terms of the regions and corridors that we serve on the left and the carrier partners here, which is great. The large Trans-Pacific services you see represented, but really some of the big legacy partners here with ICL and Sealand and Crowley, white glove service. They are also about speed, end-to-end value propositions serving the verticals. So it's really, we cater to both there. When we look at targets for where we need to grow the connectivity, Southeast Asia is a big natural trade corridor for the Carolinas, for North Carolina, and many of the same verticals that we've seen great growth with in these other corridors, we want to be able to take directly further down into Southeast Asia and South Asia. So many of our segments there, whether it's protein, whether it's furniture, whether it's other agricultural feeds and grains, and a lot of the industrial coming back in terms of serving automotive and industrial. Integrated supply chains we see also with Europe, especially on automotive. So we're excited about this. The carriers have really been on pause the last 3 or 4 years. Going back about 4 or 5 years, there was the alliance formation that took place with a lot of the big East-West carriers. That is solidified, but going into COVID, everyone stopped deploying new services, new tonnage. Well, in the last 6 months, obviously, all the global fleets are totally maxed out. Demand has been so strong, each of the corridors there. The carriers are obviously returning to a very healthy position in terms of being able to reinvest. And we've got a lot of dialogues going on now for the the next 1, 2, 3 years and where new services can be deployed. We're very excited. You may have seen recently, we just had an additional announcement with our partner Sealand. They're bringing on another Central American Caribbean service that also connects further into South America. It's a great indicator of folks are starting to play offense from the carrier side. So we expect and need to see a lot more connectivity here. We were the fastest growing port in the United States and the best performing port in the United States in those recent years. We've also had the fastest growing connectivity. Those are 3 areas that we have to continue to build on. We're playing catch up in some areas, but we're making great progress. So next slide. I think this speaks to, Brian had mentioned our Queen City Express, and this was built also with the voice of the customer, right? And a lot of it around the apparel and textile segment in the western part of the state. These are round trip import, export trade loops with Latin America. But we also saw new trucking regulations limited the amount of hours drivers could be on the road. Gas prices, obviously they went down with COVID, but we've seen them escalate both before and they're escalating again now. So this next day product connecting Charlotte in both directions, it really elevates the Charlotte inland port, would you stay there? And we're seeing both from an ocean carrier and a 3PL side, but also from the importers and exporters themselves. This is the confidence on that nearly 100% on-time performance. It's truly being used as that inland port. You know, the rail right here in Wilmington, it's about 100 meters or so from where the vessel's berth. So true on-dock connectivity. Every day, the transfer of these rail units going to and from Charlotte, it's like clockwork. And I think the ability for businesses to stage at these inland platforms, there's been a progression around the US, but what I will say, none of them really deliver on this next day true extended gateway from where the vessels are calling. So great response. We've had our biggest rail months ever when we mentioned Refrigerated earlier. Also intermodal wise, we've seen traction on this in the last couple of months. In the bottom right, you'll see the future about CCX, and that is about further connectivity. CSX has been a great partner in terms of delivering performance with this product, but it really about going deeper into the network. That's a major phase for both CSX and also North Carolina ports on the next step. And I don't know, Brian, if you want to add a little bit to that.
Yeah, I think you covered it well, Hans. You know, as we again listen to the voice of the customer, it's having that capability. It's further inland reach. And the timing of the CCX facility is such that in a very short period of time, we'll be able to provide that service as well. So.
And the same philosophy goes, we are looking for rapid connectivity. So that's what the market and the customers are going to be able to count on from NC Ports. So with that, John, I think we segue into part of the virtual tour here, and we're glad to share these details. And again, thank you. I know we'll circle back after the video to Brian. There we go. If you want to enlarge your screen, that's great.
North Carolina Ports features 2 deepwater terminals, the Port of Wilmington and the Port of Morehead City, as well as an inland port in Charlotte. The Port of Wilmington is strategically located on the east coast of the United States, within 700 miles of more than 70% of the U.S. industrial base. The Port of Wilmington offers terminal facilities serving container, bulk, breakbulk, and roll-on, roll-off operations. It offers a deep navigational channel, nearly 1 million square feet of prime covered and sprinklered storage, 9 berths, including 2,600 contiguous feet of container berth space, 9 ship-to-shore container cranes, and intermodal rail provided by CSX Transportation. What makes the Port of Wilmington so competitive is its level of efficiency. Wilmington offers the fastest truck turnaround times on the East Coast and lacks the waterside congestion that many neighboring ports face. These landside and waterside efficiencies make our port an attractive option for customers. Recent investments, backed by our more than $200 million capital improvements plan, enable NC Ports to meet the needs of our customers today and in the future. Completed improvements include a wider turning basin, berth enhancements, air draft improvements, and 3 neo-Panamax cranes, which allow the largest vessels calling on East Coast ports to reach the Port of Wilmington. A multi-million-dollar refrigerated container yard triples the port's on-terminal refrigerated container capacity to 775 refrigerated plugs and allows NC ports to better support the growing agriculture and grocery sectors across North Carolina. The Port of Wilmington features one of the only on-terminal cold storage facilities on the East Coast. The 101,000 square foot Port of Wilmington Cold Storage is a full-service public refrigerated warehouse operation. Other improvements in development include the Container Terminal Master Plan, which will increase the Port of Wilmington's annual throughput capacity to more than 1 million TEUs. Additionally, NC Ports is building a new truck gate complex and implementing new terminal and gate operating systems. The container gate complex will enable NC Ports to meet the demand of increased volume on container moves. Improvements include increasing inbound lanes for truck traffic to 7 and outbound lanes to 6. The simultaneous addition of a new terminal operating system through Navis N4 and gate operating system will enhance the efficiency of Wilmington's container yard and container gate. At North Carolina Ports, our goal is to be your best business decision, giving you a competitive advantage and more opportunity for profitability. Learn more about North Carolina Ports by visiting our website or give us a call today.
There we go. Thank you, Hans and Brian, for your presentation. And thanks, Landry, for your help with the PowerPoint presentation. Are there any, you're welcome to unmute your mics at this point, and I will and invite you to ask any questions you might have, or tell us about yourself and your concerns with attending today.
Hi, folks. Levi Houston from Cranfield Sumner, here in the firm's Admiralty and Maritime Practice Group, and we really appreciate y'all putting on the presentation. It's very interesting. The only question that sort of stuck out in my mind, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of growth that you all are facing, and I was wondering if that's part of a, we'll say, a more like Eastern Seaboard trend, or is that something we're facing specifically here in North Carolina? So in terms of comparable ports, are they looking at the same sort of growth as we are here?
Yeah, Levi, great question. And I'll start off and then pass it off to Hans. We're faced right now with a very unique time in the global economy. Obviously, volumes dropped significantly last year with the start of COVID. They rebounded unexpectedly. I think what we've seen is growth, but kind of steady measured growth across all segments. We are not seeing the 30 and 40% increase in container volume that some of our ports to the south and some of the ports on the West Coast are seeing, and they're really leading to massive amounts of congestion. I think at the height, there was, on the West Coast, 30 some odd vessels at anchor waiting to get into ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. So growth is good, but as Hans alluded to, measured growth and steady performance or improving performance is really what we're focused on. Our goal is not to be the largest. We are not out to replicate what other ports have done to grow their volumes, 4 or 5 fold over a very short period of time. But ultimately, our goal is to grow the volume, to support the consumers and shippers that are moving products in and out of North Carolina. And Hans, again, I don't know if you want to add on there.
Sure. No, thanks, and great question. And I'll touch on it maybe from 2 different angles. One is just what's happening with global supply chains right now. Actually, right before we went live on the conference, John had inquired a bit, and probably some of the things that you all are seeing yourselves across the trade community. Really, the need to diversify supply chains, to have resiliency, to mitigate, to have multi-gateway strategies. This has been around. It's not a new philosophy, but for businesses to deploy it, unfortunately, a lot of times it only becomes a real conversation in the midst of great pain. And what we're seeing now is a lot more consideration inside major organizations to stress test, to look at the design of their network and consider, okay, yes, we may have had a very cost-effective plan in the past, but can we, can we still function once one part of that melts down? And so that's a big factor, I think, where we're seeing the growth in terms of the multi-gateway strategy, and also really, again, measuring performance based on what is it doing for your business. Second part, and I got to give a lot of credit to a lot of the state stakeholders, is really this economic climate in North Carolina. Yes, there is a lot of growth happening on the East Coast. We're seeing shifts from the Northeast and from the West Coast in terms of businesses and the Sun Belt here and the growth in general. But this climate, we're seeing a lot of visits with economic development partners from folks that actually, if they don't have a footprint here, they're thinking about coming here or expanding a legacy business that's already here. And I got to give a lot of credit. There's a lot of momentum across a lot of verticals here in the state. So I think, some of our other partners, or I guess you could say competitors on the East Coast, they've seen a variety of growth, but sometimes it was in one segment or really catering just to a retail vertical and distribution. Here, we're trying to cater to all those different verticals, but the groundswell of the economic climate here in North Carolina, it's poised, and we're seeing a lot of that translate into a completely different kind of more diversified growth. So hope that answers the question.
Yes, thanks, gentlemen.
Let me follow that up with a question. Are you getting the kind of support you need from state government, from state agencies? We can be partners to help you in that if you need any of that support.
I can say without a doubt, we're getting great support. We shared a lot of the investments that have been made. None of that's possible without the appropriations that we've been receiving for the last number of years. And really, those around the state championing what we can do as an entity of the state. So we see it firsthand that reinvesting in the ports was a good investment based on the growth. But again, just to answer your first question, tremendous support across the entire state.
Excellent. Other questions or comments? Wayne Cooper?
Yeah, I'm just curious. How does it take more than one pilot to get from to get a ship from the ocean into the port?
So in Wilmington, there's two pilots. One is the Cape Fear River pilot that takes it from the sea buoy up to a certain point in the river, and then hands it over to a docking pilot that typically works alongside the tug companies for the final maneuvering up in the river.
Okay, thank you.
Clem, have you got any comments or questions?
I have a question. My name is Clem Schrader. I spent a number of years in the global logistics business, as they say today. Are there any plans to increase the services, the European and UK service? I know ICL came along as a godsend years back, but I would hope in the next few years there are going to be some trade agreements signed. And it just seems to me like that's an area where possibly larger vessels and more vessels could be used.
Great question. And again, I'll start off and then hand it to Hans. As we look towards the future, one of my first steps or initiatives, if you will, taking over as executive director is to kind of look forward for the next 5 years and along with the senior team and the board of directors, develop a 5-year strategy. One of the key pillars of that strategy is expanding our global reach, not just on the containerized trade, but across all of our services. We serve a certain number of markets today. We have a number of port pairs, but ultimately for us to grow the volume, we've got to have a broader reach. So that's where Hans and his team comes in. We have the tools, we have the toolkit available, and now it's convincing and encouraging customers to start adding services to our port and taking advantage of those capabilities. Again, Hans, I'll pass it off to you.
Yep, thanks, Brian. And hey, Clem, I think it's been a bit since the Ag Expo, but good to see your face. And I tell you, it was right after that expo is when we headed to Korea that afternoon, and that was some of the impetus of those larger vessels coming here. So just good to see you again. And as Brian mentioned, ICL has been a tremendous pillar and partner here. What's amazing is over the course of the COVID rebound in the last few months, we work closely with their team. They are also demonstrating more growth here. So it's fantastic to see them growing, but there is a much bigger market out there, and especially in certain industries where it's almost integrated supply chains on the industrial side with Europe. And as you mentioned, the trade agreements. So on several facets, whether that's industrial or cold chain, there's definitely going to be opportunity for growth. Some of the other gateways on the East Coast cater in a deeper way to certain trade corridors. But as Brian mentioned, there's been congestion. There are other challenges at some of these gateways. And I think with our performance, as growth begins to pick up more and more speed, they're trying to make a decision in terms of the carrier community on, not just what a service looks like on paper, but how do they deliver the performance that's required with the supply chains that are riding on those ships. So I'm excited. There's definitely, there's plenty of room for ICL to grow, but there's room for more as well when it comes to UK and Europe and Mediterranean and beyond.
How about Matt Stewart? Matt, are you with us? Can you come on board and introduce yourself? Can you bring your video up? Maybe not. Matt's with Wood Forest National Bank and has joined the association, has become a sponsor of CWTA, and we're awfully happy to have him. Anyone else that might want to speak up? Ted Smoyer, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, John. Don't have any specific questions, but it's Ted Smoyer. I'm an assurance manager with Greer Walker. We're a CPA firm serving the Carolinas. We have a lot of international clients, both importing, exporting. So trying to pick up as much as I can, trying to be as advisory as possible to all of our clients.
Great. And a comment I'll add is we've had a few conferences here in Wilmington as over the last couple of years. We're picking up a lot of focus around some of the more major legacy segments from North Carolina, cold chain, furniture, if you will. And what's been great is also the financial community has taken part in a lot of these, and the other stakeholders really required to support economic growth. And so what I would say is it's great to see as more and more of the supply chain community gathers, it's going way beyond transportation and it's including other parts. So glad you're a part of this dialogue.
John?
Hello.
John, this is Bob Wicker. I'm chairman of the North Carolina State Ports Authority Board of Directors.
Great. Welcome,
I
Bob.
just want to give a shout out to Brian and to Hans and to the senior management team for the excellent, outstanding job that they are doing in growing our ports. This just doesn't happen. It happens because people come together and have a vision. Brian is going to be presenting our strategic plan in the next few months, and he's worked very hard with the team to do that. And I'm very excited about the prospects for the ports, and we appreciate being able to partner with Carolina World Trade Association and other groups. Our ports have a bright future, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Wicker. I'm happy to have you here. And please know that if you ever need help, CWTA stands ready to support any efforts you might need.
Thank you, John.
I'm going to ask Matt Stewart to try again. I had to flip a switch to allow him to speak up. Matt, go ahead, try. I see an unmute. We're still not getting you, Matt. I'm sorry. Anyone else like to speak up? Jan Martin from Domtar? Whoop, we just lost her. Didn't mean to frighten her away. Alan Gordon, how about you?
Yes, I'm here. And no, I thought it was a very great presentation, and I'm really excited about how much growth has taken place and how much building and expansion. How do we compare with Savannah? Because I remember reading a lot about the Savannah Harbor and their port moves and the automotive industry. So since they're And then my second question would be, yeah, that West Coast parking jam sounded like an incredible mess. Do we have anything like that on the East Coast with that kind of increase in growth? But back to what's up with Savannah?
Hans, why don't I pass that to you?
Very good. As you mentioned, yes, significant growth there. I think Savannah, they did some clever things going back a couple decades ago and building or starting a very large import distribution universe. And ultimately that served them well. It also attracted a lot of ocean services. So they're benefiting from that growth. I think a lot of supply chains, East Coast supply chains, were very much oriented around New York and Norfolk prior to that. And then now Savannah has come on the scene in a big way of the past decade with, again, that distribution, but also e-commerce. But what we're also seeing is there's not one answer. There is no silver bullet, right? And I think that's, Brian mentioned the, 30 ships on the West Coast. At times we were seeing a dozen or so off of New York, also off of Savannah. From a geographic and a configuration standpoint, we're almost identical to Savannah in terms of distance up the river depth. So all of those details, we're poised. We're not looking to become Savannah, but I think, again, performance versus scale is becoming a bigger part of the conversation. So that's really where I see it. I mean, Savannah, hats off, they've had a lot of success, but they're also a victim of their success on certain ways. And for the mid-South Atlantic, we are poised to really cater to this expanding demographic. North Carolina's moving to number 8 in terms of population. And this is the closest gateway proximity-wise to serve with the best economics, best performance, best value. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add anything.
I think you said it well. A port like Savannah's done a great job over the number of years attracting significant amounts of volumes. As I said earlier, almost every service that's calling the East Coast is calling either New York or Savannah or both. But there's opportunity in front of us as North Carolina ports to grow our volume, to grow it smartly, and ultimately to support the users of our ports and the economy of our state.
And I wanted to add one piece to that. I know we had you all had a member, a Domtar member there. They're another great example. Or we do work with Domtar on both the container front and the general cargo front. And so the ability to use both of those capabilities here in Wilmington, it is a good example because I think some of the container growth has been tremendous, but in some cases the general cargo has been compromised or even stood down in certain gateways, and the East Coast is no different there, where we are committed to continuing to serve that general cargo side as well. And we have one port that's completely dedicated to it, even though we can also do it in Wilmington.
I did get a question from Matt Stewart via the chat box. He apologized for his connection, and he says, it would be great to hear about the current relationship with the labor unions. How are you affected in that arena?
It's an excellent relationship. We had that recent announcement about the new service calling the port, and the first phone call when we heard about it was to the president of the ILA to talk about the opportunity. And without a doubt, we get great support for new business opportunities, both here and in Moorhead City. There's different leadership in both ports. All the ports from Moorhead City down to Texas under the South Atlantic and Gulf Coast ILA district, and the leadership in that district are just tremendous individuals. I've had the opportunity to work with them, not just here, but in my previous career for the last 25 years. And great leaders, great supporters of trade and growth. And I look forward to continuing to work with the leadership here in Wilmington and Morehead City in the future.
Excellent, Brian. Steve Posson, how about you? You want to speak up and say hello and ask anything?
Sure. Thanks a lot, John, and thanks to all of you for joining. The question I had was about the investment in the cold chain that serves agriculture, serves the export from Smithfield and protein and what have you. Is China still an active, investor in the area for infrastructure or cold chain storage and processing via Wilmington, which is a form of cooperation or working together with other countries?
And I would say still active, yes, but they are certainly not alone. I think we've seen different collectives, both domestically and internationally, that are very focused on cold chain. Obviously, a lot of the cold network in the US is either saturated or aged or both. And we have a very dense, you could say, set of legacy capacity and facilities here in the state. That are, a lot of those are maxed out, as you mentioned, with some of the agriculture. But as additional industry sets come online in terms of using the gateway or actually wanting to control more of that supply chain here within the state, be that across the grocery sector, be that across life science, we have a tremendous universe of that here. I think these are areas where additional growth and investment is getting a lot of focus right now. And obviously, COVID exacerbated many things, but certain buying habits, they've been evolving and now they've just accelerated, right? So that cold universe is going to get a lot bigger. I think we're in a great position to service it. China, it's interesting, in the past year, and our agriculture friends at the Department of Agriculture, a great partner there, the poultry ban had been on for 5 years and came off this past year. We saw, I think from a trade perspective, receipts go over 100 million within 1 year. So the idea of being able to service those key legacy, sectors of pork, poultry, sweet potatoes through the cold chain, we will continue to see that. I even expect that to go even bigger as our capability and capacity grows here. But we're also seeing it now move into other verticals within the cold sector. So that's, I think, a very exciting port, because from an import standpoint, equipment optimization, all of those things, there's a lot more that can be done and a lot more value that can be derived in the cold chain via these gateways and here within the state of North Carolina.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Anybody else like to step up with a comment or a question? Some of you who have been mute or no video, you're welcome to join us. How about James from Senator Tillis's office? You're talking about that new infrastructure bill. Maybe there's an earmark that would be helpful to the port that Senator Tillis could help with.
Hey folks, it's good to be with y'all. Thanks for letting me join. I don't have any questions for you, Hans. It's good to see you again. I haven't seen you since pre-COVID, so it's been a little while. Obviously, if the port has any questions or concerns from a federal perspective, whether it's legislatively funding or if there's any restrictions from a policy standpoint coming in, we're happy to be of assistance and take a look at those and see what options are on the table for our office to help. But no questions on mine. Just good to be with y'all. Thanks for letting me join.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James. And on behalf of the ports, thank you for all the support out of the senator's office.
Very much so, and hopefully we can connect in person again. Before too long. But as Brian mentioned, I think tremendous support. A lot of what's happened these past 4 or 5 years would not have happened without really the support and the alignment. So a big thank you from our side as well.
Absolutely, we're happy to be of help, and y'all do good work, so it makes it easy.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
I'm going to put in one more plug for our newcomer, Matt Stewart. Matt came to us. Came to Charlotte after having worked in Africa and having served in Cape Town, South Africa. He did a lot of work on risk management, did some work with the Exim Bank. So if anybody's looking for that kind of expertise or insight, Matt Stewart is just the right guy to call on for that kind of support. And we hope that he can help us expand our international trade business out of North Carolina. Anyone else? I think I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you to everybody for attending today. It's 11:25. We're awfully happy that you participated. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our sponsors, NC Ports, for putting this together for us. We're awfully proud of the work you do, Brian and Hans, and we look forward to working with you for many years.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity, John. Appreciate being able to share about the ports. And again, the invitation remains open for an in-person visit at an appropriate time in the future.
We'd like that very much.
Great.
Thank you.
Also, thank you,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Good
Thanks, everybody.
program. Very good. Y'all.